Hey guys, my guest tonight, John Brandenburg, is going to tell us his theory of what actually happened at Roswell. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Happy Monday, everybody. How's everybody doing? I think you said great. Well, you think of it this way. Each day brings us closer to Friday, right? So, Monday's Monday, right? We're just all getting our days, our week started. I was going to say days started. I mean, I've had a busy day, so I just got in. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you think you have a paranormal need, we can get you. It might take us a couple days, but we definitely will get to you. And in the case that we can't get to you right away, we do have mediums on staff who could phone you and do a remote read. And if what's going on is paranormal, then they're able to settle the energy down before we can get out there. That way you don't have to deal with it. That way you don't have to be afraid or deal with it. So that when we get out there, we can work on it. All right, that being said, a lot of you are watching from Facebook tonight. I do appreciate that. For those of you on Facebook who are new and haven't yet decided to follow me, please do that, especially if you like what you hear and see tonight. Got a great guest lined up tonight. And also, remember to chat amongst yourselves in the chat room, and also thumbs up. Show me some love, okay? Show me some love tonight. I'd really appreciate it. What that does is that puts us up higher in Facebook's, what they call the computer for the FYP, which means the show gets shared out to more people, which is what we want, right? Because we want this thing shared so that we get more of an audience. So that helps. Also, if you share it out, maybe there's someone in your house that you think would like the show, please share it with them as well. Same thing with YouTube. YouTube, we've got more than 1,000 videos over there. They're all of this show. They're all different topics. I'm a journalist, a photojournalist, and I like to change it up. I mean, one night you might get ghosts, you might get UFOs, and like tomorrow night we're going to talk about helping bees survive in our world, right? So I like to change it up. Same thing applies. If you haven't subscribed already at YouTube and you like and hear what you like and see and hear what you do today, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. We are trying to build that up. Like I said, we're building up everywhere. Plus, show me some love. Works the same way. YouTube FYP, just like Twitch, that works the same way. So so does TikTok or any of those other ones for that matter. Okay, so help me out with that. Okay, got that out of the way. Be sure to visit our Patreon. It's patreon.com/California Haunts Radio. The C, the H, and the R is capitalized. Go check out our Patreon. We've got some really good offers. We've got 3 levels of membership over there. Really, really good offers. And what it does when you sign up is it helps us stay on the air. So we can keep creating some really cool content for you guys. And look, I just disappeared. It's going to be a busy night, okay? Everybody in my neighborhood has Xfinity. And the Democratic National Convention starting, so I suspect it's going to be a busy night of weird things with the internet tonight, because everybody gets home about now, they're having dinner and then they flip on their laptop to watch TV, or maybe they're watching YouTube TV, or one of those other little internet those internet TV things. So, just an FYI. All right, get to my guest. I am excited about this. I have been following what happened at Roswell for years, and I remember. And I can't remember when, okay? My dad used to get Argosy magazine. And it has to be, because in the late 60s, I was still way too young to remember a lot of things. So you talk about, I'll say 75 on, maybe 1973 on. I remember seeing one of the Argosy magazines that he got. And they actually had pictures of an alien autopsy on there. Don't know what it was to this day. And, I always thought growing up that that was something related to Roswell. I don't know. I'll probably never know. Because I've been trying to find copies of that particular magazine. I get on their site, do all these searches, Google, can't find anything about it. But I always felt that these were some of the aliens that had crashed at Roswell. Anyhow, my guest tonight has some interesting theories about Roswell. I think you're going to like it. John Brandenburg, yeah, he's a smart guy, and he's done a lot of research. So let's bring him in. He can tell you about himself, get the show on the road, and all that good stuff. Here we go. Hello, sir.
Hey there, Charlotte. How you doing? So great, a pleasure and honor to be on your show.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you.
Huntsville, California.
I've been wanting to
What's
get
that?
you on for quite a while.
Oh, good, good. Well, here I am.
Tell me about
And
you.
okay, I am a physicist working on plasmas primarily, which are um, gas that is so hot that it glows and conducts electricity. It's like the northern lights, if you've ever seen
Hmm.
those. That's plasma. The sun is plasma. The stars, lightning bolts, uh, neon signs, that's all plasma. So plasmas are bright and beautiful and jump around a lot.
Hmm.
And we're also trying to harness fusion power to stop global climate change. And that involves harnessing plasmas. I
Hmm.
mean, that's the way the sun and the stars do it. Other people think they have better schemes to make fusion, but every night, every morning, the sun rises, and then when it sets, the stars come out, and
Hmm.
there is the universe using fusion power to make all of the source of all light and warmth in the universe, basically.
Hmm.
And so that's what I've been studying, and I did my got my PhD in California. I grew up in Oregon, just across the southern Oregon, just across the border from um, California. And then I
Hmm.
went to school at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which has had an extension campus from UC Davis, and studied plasmas for harnessing fusion. And you can
Hmm.
use plasmas for a lot of things like space propulsion, also. Ion thrusters for space use plasma. And so, anyway, I've had a great time working on that, and we're gonna harness this fusion thing. If the stars do it and the suns do it, we can do it,
Absolutely.
and and it'll be much cleaner and safer than the present form of nuclear power we have, and it will solve uh, climate change. It will. And so, anyway, there I'll get down off my soapbox, and um, one of the things that happened is that I ended up working on a lot of space projects
Hmm.
with the Pentagon, and of course the intel agencies. I was working in Washington D.C. With them, and this was during the 80s, about like 85, and then I stayed there until probably about 2002, right after 9/11. Um, So I went through 9/11 in Washington, D.C. That was pretty unpleasant. But I heard a lot of interesting rumors around the coffee machine and the water cooler, let's put it that way.
Hmm.
And I'm also been very interested in the planet Mars. And I hate to break it to you, but it looks like there's a dead civilization on Mars. It looks like Mars used to be a lot like Earth and had a basically human-looking civilization. At least things they carved look like human faces, and they made monuments that look like pyramids. So it looks like old. It looks like things from the Olmecs and the Aztecs, the whole Toltecs from old Mexico. So quite fascinated with that, and I discovered then, while I was part of that investigation, that the government got fascinated with me. And I didn't believe in UFOs at the time, but I kept thinking, gee, we just found this what looks like a dead civilization on Mars, and that'll help end the Cold War. That would be a good thing, don't you think? And then why is the government so interested in us? I was working with a group of other scientists and engineers, and our phones started making funny noises whenever we talked to each other. They would sound like they were in echo chambers, and there would be clicking and tapping, and I joked one point. I said, "You can tell our phones are being tapped because you hear these tapping noises whenever we mention the word Mars." And I realized the government, this was not news to the government. There was a dead civilization on Mars, apparently. And so I became more open. I didn't believe in UFOs at the time. By the way, when I was in graduate school, working at a government lab that built hydrogen bombs at one end of the lab and was trying to harness fusion at the other end of the lab for peaceful purposes. When you're trying to get your PhD and your thesis advisor says, there are no such things as UFOs, right, John? And I say, yes, sir, please sign my thesis so I can get out of here and get a real job and buy my wife a nice house. That's what you say. That's what you do. They tell you the world is flat when you're a graduate student, and to stay away from the edges. Don't go asking questions about what lies over the edge. So it came as a big shock to me that I learned in Washington, D.C. there was a UFO cover-up. And this was just shocking to me because I talked to people finally who felt they'd been abducted by aliens. I talked to people in the government who basically said, yes, there's what one colonel told me. He worked at the Pentagon. And I just said, is there a UFO cover-up? And he said, are we covering up something in outer space that we're afraid of? And he said, yes. And that's all I can tell you. You can figure out the rest from, what's out there on the internet and so I began investigating this for myself. And I'd also been investigating the planet Mars because so basically, Charlotte, I woke up one morning thinking I can't keep working for a government that's concealing secrets like this. I have to go someplace and get out of here. I'm going to give this all up and go teach science at some college, and I was very, very upset. But then I realized every government on earth lies to its people. I mean, where can I go where, that the governments always tell their people whatever they feel like they need to hear at the time. They don't necessarily tell them the truth. And so, I decided to stay and do what I could to end the cover-ups. So not only do we have a UFO cover-up, we have a Mars cover-up. And we also, we have a cover-up, basically some of the meteorites we're getting from outer space that show that there's life out there, just bacterial life. The government doesn't even want that to come out. And let me tell you how the government does this. If you're a scientist working at some university, you don't even have to be working for the government, but in order to get grant money from the from the government, and let me tell you, I've taught at universities, they were all about grant money. It didn't matter if you showed up in class wearing jackass ears and ran around the room screaming. As long as you brought in grant money, you could keep your job. So I discovered that the government controls what people talk about, even in academic science, by controlling the grant money. If you say, oh, I think I found, if you go to NASA headquarters, for instance, and say, oh, I think I found evidence for life on Mars, And the NASA official will smile at you and say, well, we certainly can't give you any more money if you're going to go talking like that. And then you say, well, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I've found evidence for life on planets thousands of light years from here. And they say, that's better. I'm sorry, that's the way things work.
Right.
They will sit there and smile while you're telling them that you found evidence for fossils in Martian rock, and then they'll smile at you, and then they'll point up at a something written on the whiteboard beside them that says, "There is no life on Mars unless we say so." So the government is managing science in this country. And it basically makes sure that science advances along paths that they like. Now, getting back to the whole UFO phenomenon, Charlotte, let's imagine that not only is California haunted, but so is the entire planet Earth. We're living in a haunted house because we've been told there are no ghosts out there in the stars. There's no intelligent species out there. We are the supreme masters of the only place in the universe that matters. The rest of the universe is a desert, and we control the only oasis in it. That's what the government is basically telling us. And then suddenly there's lights in the sky, and people have had then experiences where they've actually talked with extraterrestrials, they believe, or in some cases been abducted by them.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of other things that happen. And the government says, basically, you're just imagining this. These are weather balloons or sightings of Venus. They don't, as long as there's been human civilization, for instance, Charlotte, the ancient Greeks figured out that the stars in the sky were other suns. And they figured out that the Earth was actually orbiting the sun. There was a Greek philosopher named Aristarchus. He figured it all out. He figured out how big the moon was, how far away it was from the sun. He was off by maybe a factor of 50% or something. He figured out how the sun was farther away, and the moon and the sun, could line up and make eclipses and things like this. And he said, they're different planets. You can see Mars and Jupiter and Venus and even Mercury. And he figured it all out. And he started wandering around Athens. This was during the period of Pericles, was running Athens, the golden age of Greece. He was arrested by the priesthood of the temples of Jupiter and Mars. And they told him, you're speaking against the gods. And so they locked him up in jail, and Pericles himself had to come down, post his bail, and put him on the next ship out of the harbor. And he said, don't come back here and talk about such things. And then the Romans took over from the Greeks. And the Romans said, the Romans lined up all the Greek philosophers in a room one day and said, Rome is on Earth, and Rome is the center of the universe, right? Capiche? And the Greeks all nodded, and the Romans said, good, we understand each other. Rome is the center of the universe, and Rome is on Earth, therefore, this is the most important place in the universe. And has anybody else got any other ideas, said the Romans to the Greeks. And the Greeks, being smart people, said, no, sir. We're all fine with this. So what they did basically is they established that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around us. And that's the way the powers that be like it. Because if the powers that be on Earth hear that the Earth is the most important place in the universe, they're happy. And anyone who runs around saying that the Earth is just another speck of dust in the universe, they say, you better watch what you're saying here. You're demoting us. You're giving us a demotion here. So anyway, Charlotte, so that's the way things are. It's part of the psychological power structure of the powers that be. And it's true in every country. That's why the UFO cover-up has lasted so long, is that people know deep in their hearts that we're not alone. The human race is basically psychic. I believe in what's called the Jungian collective self-conscious. The collective subconscious of the human race. And the collective subconscious, I believe, actually extends out to the stars. We're in psychic contact with people in other stars. And we know they're out there, subconsciously. But consciously, and I'm in Southern Oregon. And if you start talking about some of this stuff to some people, they just don't want to hear about it.
Right.
By one person I know is a good friend. I grew up with him. He just says, I'm not going down that rabbit hole, John. They don't want to hear about it. And so Charlotte, what happened was I began investigating the whole UFO thing. And I wrote a novel, by the way, called Morning Star Past, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. You can see it on Amazon.com. Morning Star Past, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. It has two women bring down the UFO cover-up, by the way. They're both news anchors. Yes. Oh, yes. One of them is Asian. The main heroine is Asian, named Cassandra Chen. She's Chinese-American, and she grew up rich in San Diego. And the other woman, her good friend, is a blonde from Cleveland, Ohio, who started out as a weather girl and grew up poor in Cleveland. And they make a great pair because one is very philosophical and the other one's very practical. And but anyway, in the end, they do actually succeed in bringing down the UFO cover-up. So what happens, though, is I had to understand the UFO cover-up before I could write this novel. And what I did was I had been through 9/11 in Washington, D.C. I mean, I'm driving my little girl to work, my youngest daughter to school, and the radio in my car had decided to break down, so I couldn't listen to the news. I get to the school. She had to go see the doctor to get a final checkup before she could start school. So that all went fine. So then I bring her in, and they take her to her class, the nice ladies in the office. And then I said, why is it so quiet here? And they said, shh, we don't want the children to know what's going on. 9/11 was happening. And I didn't know anything about it. Because it had all come out of a blue sky that morning.
Right.
And that's what happened. 9/11 is what happens when the government miscalculates. It's like a Pearl Harbor sort of situation. And that was just a terrible, terrible, nightmarish thing that happened. And because I'd heard all this stuff about the UFO cover-up, I decided somebody should write a novel about what could go wrong if the UFO cover-up didn't end. And these two women have to end it. And in the novel, by the way, when the UFO cover-up starts to end, both women are finally in fear for their lives. And but what happens in the novel is that the secret government attempts a coup d'etat to preserve the UFO cover-up. because the UFO, this in the novel, the secret government exists to preserve the UFO cover-up because it's getting benefits from it. And so, but the UFO cover-up apparently began with Roswell officially. People had been seeing UFOs during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
1942, they called them Foo Fighters. My father was in the Army Air Force during World War II. He was a combat veteran. He never saw any Foo Fighters, but a lot of people flying in the bombers did. They would just see balls of fire chasing their airplanes,
Mm-hmm.
and they were just considered a nuisance. They captured documents from the Germans after the war ended and the Japanese, and both the Japanese and Germans thought that the Foo Fighters were secret weapons of the Allies. The Allies thought they might be secret weapons of the Germans. Nobody knew what they were.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they were basically considered just a nuisance. Then World War II ended. Now, you must remember, Charlotte, the mental landscape after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
75 million human beings had died during World War II. We had gone through Pearl Harbor. We'd gone through the Battle of the Bulge. We'd gone through all of these terrible things. 300,000 Americans were dead because of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Millions were dead, or in most of Europe and the Far East were in ruins because of World War II. So all of these things had happened, and it's 1947,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly people see all of these what they call flying saucers. They were seeing them all over the country. That's when they got the names flying saucers. It started in June of 1947. That's less than 2 years after World War II had ended. We all remember something that happened like 2 years before, especially if it was quite dramatic. That's what
Mm-hmm.
the world was basically haunted by World War II. It was trying to forget it, but it couldn't forget it.
Mm-hmm.
My uh, One of my uncles was in the combat infantry in World War II. He helped liberate death camps. It's one of the
Wow.
reasons he would never talk about the war. I didn't even know he'd been through World War II. It only came out the last year of his life after he'd had a heart attack. Then he
Mm-hmm.
would talk about it a little bit. He remembered meeting the Russians in the middle of Germany, the Russian army, and the Russian army passing out vodka to all the American troops. He remembered that as a happy memory. That's the only thing he would say about World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So we found out later what he had been involved in, and one of them was liberating death camps, apparently. So,
Wow.
so this has only happened 2 years before. Now it's June 1947. Everyone is seeing UFOs all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
They're over the cities, they're over all sorts of military bases, and in particular, they're over this one military base at Roswell, New Mexico. Roswell was already famous because that's where Robert Goddard launched his first rockets,
Mm-hmm.
and the Germans copied his rockets and made them bigger and made them into the V2. That's how good his rockets were. And he launched them in Roswell, New Mexico in 1930.
Wow.
Now they put all of the nuclear weapons on Earth were stored at Roswell
Really?
with
Yeah, I didn't know
bombers that
that. Wow.
yeah, no, well, I only learned that because they had a reunion of all of the people from Roswell who'd been at
Mm-hmm.
Roswell and they told me that I'd had dinner with them, and there were officers there who'd been officers on the base,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, "Oh yeah, most people don't know we had all the nuclear weapons on Earth stored there in concrete bunkers. We had 5 nuclear weapons, and we
Mm-hmm.
had the airplanes, the B-29s to carry them, like carried them at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now these were Nagasaki-style bombs, and they were full of plutonium, which you can detect with gamma rays from a distance. the government notices that the UFOs are flying over Roswell, and the government freaks out. The government, you remember the fact that, the biggest novel about extraterrestrial life that got into the public's imagination was War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which was
Right.
then made into a radio program that one night,
Mm-hmm.
frightened the wits out of people. And that's where the government found out, if they didn't already know, that people were spotting canals on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
They knew Mars had polar caps like the Earth and dust storms, and they were spotting what they thought were canals. They thought an invasion from people from the planet Mars, that there were people on Mars and they could get here. And this
Yeah.
really frightened people, even though they didn't talk about it. So when they did the radio program, and H.G. Wells' nephew, Orson Welles, did it.
Yes.
He was a joker. I'm sorry. And he deliberately made the program so if somebody tuned in and hadn't heard the introduction, they would be
Well,
scared to death. And it succeeded. People thought we were being invaded from outer space. Now everybody was nervous because Hitler was coming into power in Germany, and Germany was getting ready to have World War II. And the Americans thought we might get sucked into that, and they didn't want to. So everybody was on edge anyway. But then they found out that the United States considered itself even then the most powerful country on earth. But suppose it has to confront somebody not from this earth. What then, Charlotte? What then? So all of these UFOs are being sighted. There'd been 2 UFO crashes before this. One place in a place called Missouri called Cape Girardeau. And the other, that was before the war started. And another place, it was in 1941, same year as Pearl Harbor, but it happened before Pearl Harbor. Then there was another one that happened over Los Angeles. And that I heard when I was in DC that that vehicles crashed then. And they found bodies in there that looked like short little gray men with big eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so the government was very nervous about this. And now, just imagine you notice somebody cruising through your neighborhood. Let's say you're into guns. I'm not. I don't own a gun.
Right.
But suppose you do. Suppose you got a big gun collection. And you notice this car keeps driving around the neighborhood. And one night you spot them and they're looking at your window at your gun collection. What are you going to think? Well, you call the police. Say,
Right.
these people are casing the joint. They're either out to steal my guns or they're out to break into my house and they want to know how many guns I have.
Right.
So the government freaks out. And Philip Corso wrote this book called The Day After Roswell. And he talked about the fact that the U.S. government quite literally was freaked out about all these UFOs all over the country. And not only that, the UFOs were flying over Roswell, where all our nuclear weapons were stored. And you know that there have been numerous reports of the extraterrestrials being interested in our nuclear weapons. But this was the first time this had happened. So what had happened was, according to Corso, they started having fighter patrols over Roswell. By the way, they didn't tell the people at Roswell Air Base what was going on. It was what's called compartmentalized secrets. The right hand knows what the left does. It's like on a ship, if you have watertight compartments, if one compartment gets full of water, the ship doesn't sink because you can seal it off. So they had not told the people at Roswell Army Air Base, who were a bunch of bomber crews, about the UFO stuff, that they had crashed UFOs. The government kept that very secret. So then what happens is the fighter bases, which were at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, and I used to work there, by the way, a place called Sandia National Labs. Then a place called Holloman Air Force Base, which is near Alamogordo. It's where they tested the first nuclear weapon. They knew all about that the government was scared about UFOs because they were fighter bases. And so at night, during the day, they had jet fighters. They had the first jet fighters then, but the jet fighters in those days could not fly at night, and they didn't have radar. They hadn't made radar small enough to put it on airplanes, at least jet airplanes. The jet airplanes would barely fly in those days. So at night, they patrolled the skies over Roswell with the standard night fighter that had radar on it. It was called the P-61 Black Widow, and it looked like a Black Widow fighter. It was painted glossy black because they found that that was the best way to hide in the sky, especially if there were searchlights. And apparently what happened is they found 2 UFOs near Roswell in the middle of the night, and they shot them down. That's the big secret. And this explains why near Roswell they found a whole bunch of wreckage. One of the ships apparently blew up, which means it would have disappeared off radar in those days. The radars weren't very good. And then the other one, if you read the original book on the Roswell incident by Berlet and Moore, they talk about there were 2 crashes, basically the same morning. It was the morning of Independence Day. Doesn't that sound familiar? Like the movie?
Like the movie, yeah.
So, hey, Hollywood takes its cue from Washington, D.C. There's a big fiber optic bundle that runs from Hollywood under the country to Washington, D.C. And it goes to a place called Langley where the CIA headquarters is and the Pentagon, and they give them ideas for movies. Apparently on Independence Day, the very early morning, like 1 or 2 in the morning of 4th of July, this World War II night fighter with, propeller plane, but it had a radar in the nose. And the crew were World War II veterans. They'd been shooting down planes at night all during World War II. They were experts at it. And what they would do, they would use the radar from the ground to tell them, where something was. Then they would get close to it and they'd use their own radar to get a lock on it. Then when they'd get close, the Germans and the Japanese developed radar detectors so they could tell when somebody was shining radar on them.
Right.
They learned about that, so what they did is they would turn off their own radar. And they would go in, they would wear red goggles all day before flying at night and take them off at night because it gave them good night vision.
Sure.
They would use night binoculars. The pilots would actually use these great big night binoculars. They'd come in, they'd sneak up on the enemy planes without any they'd just get close with the radar, and then they'd shut off the radar, and the airplane they were chasing would think it was safe. And apparently the same thing happened to these 2 UFOs near Roswell, and the Roswell UFOs were snooping over our nuclear weapons, and the government just couldn't handle it. So that's apparently what happened. One of them got blown up in midair, and the other one got a big hole shot in it and limped away and crashed near a place called Socorro. Actually, it's the place called the Plains of San Augustine. It's where they have the great big telescope that they had in the movie Contact, big radio telescope. And that one, when it landed in the morning, Army troops were there to pick it up because there were witnesses. and they said there was this bunch of troops arrived in trucks. There was a team of archaeologists who were investigating Indian settlement, old Indian ruins,
Right.
and they they saw it. And this red-haired colonel in the army started lining them all up. They picked up all the pieces. The ship was a big flying saucer with a big hole in the side, full of
Right.
dead aliens, and dead aliens are on the ground. And they army troops picked it all up and put it on trucks and took it away. And the red-haired colonel lined up all the people who were there who were just civilians and told them,
Right.
he said, you didn't see anything here. He said, if you talk about what you saw, we're going to kill you and we're going to kill your families. That was what things were like in those days. It
Right.
was just after World War II. And so they went away and didn't talk about it to anybody for years. So that's how it ended up in the Berlitz book on the day after the Roswell incident with Berlitz and Moore.
Wow.
So then what happened near Roswell, the people at the airbase didn't know anything had happened. Nobody told them anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody was seeing UFOs. It was in all the newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
So this rancher named Max Brazel, 4 days after 4th of July, 4 days, he's out checking on some cows in these pastures near Roswell, and he finds all this wreckage. So he reports it to the sheriff. The sheriff takes the pieces of wreckage to the airbase,
Mm-hmm.
and the airbase goes and investigates. They find there's 2 football-sized fields of wreckage out there. The second field, by the way, they found bodies of aliens. So what happened was the base the base called up the local newspaper. They didn't know. They didn't know they weren't supposed to talk about it. They called up the newspaper and they said, "We got one. We shot down a UFO." They didn't say that. They just said one crashed. And then so the local paper carried it, and it caused a big fuss. And then this army general, in those days the Air Force was part of the army, called up the base commander, chewed his head off over the phone, and they retracted the story. Said, "Oh, it's just a weather balloon." But then the same red-haired colonel who was at the other site showed up at Roswell Army Air Base and took over the base. He was a colonel, just like the guy who commanded the base. And for like a week, they did nothing but go out and gather wreckage and bodies, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And they then put them on airplanes and shipped them all out to Texas, where apparently they put them in trucks and then had a truck convoy with armed escort all the way up to Ohio to Patterson Air Force Base. So that's what really happened at Roswell. It was a military clash. And what it is the government decided after that at least some of the aliens out there were threats to us. Not all of them, just some of them. And now we've since found out. Here's the really interesting thing. You're going to love some of this. There are people out there in the stars, Charlotte, who look just like us. You could walk by one on the street, you wouldn't even know they were not from the earth. And if you want to see an example of this, you got to watch the Walt Disney movie called Moon Pilot.
Okay.
It's this astronaut. It's a Walt Disney movie, 1962. This guy's supposed to fly around the moon, and instead he's approached by this woman who says the radiation protection on your capsule is not good enough. You got to put this more coating on this of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Take this to your NASA people and tell them to put it on there. Otherwise, you'll die out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he falls in love with her. They get married. They have children, just like Mr. Spock on Star Trek.
Right.
His mother was from Earth. His father was from the planet Vulcan. The Vulcans look pretty much like us, except the ears.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard in Washington, D.C., from several sources, yes, the government was very concerned that there were people down here who were not from here who look just like us. And they're apparently quite friendly to us. So that's good. They
Right.
got starships just like the other little aliens, the little guys, but these people look just like us and they're friendly to us and they got big starships too. So that's one reason we've been protected, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so so this can all have a happy ending. The future's going to look like Star Trek. In the original Star Trek kind of legend, the people who reached out to the human race was the Vulcans. They came down and met with the humans and taught us, you know, how to join the federation of other
Mm-hmm.
peoples out there. And so I believe something like that's going to happen. But in the meantime, the government had a real beef, let's say, with these little short gray aliens, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty much what the UFO cover-up is all about. We have a low intensity conflict going.
Mm-hmm.
It's like two motorcycle gangs getting in bar fights every once in a while. Uh, you know how those things go. The Hells
Absolutely.
Angels and the Mongols, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. The Cossacks, they it's like that
Mm-hmm.
apparently. And but then we have these people. I got to tell you one story I heard from
Okay.
just 3 weeks ago. You got to you got to hear this. Site 51 is, of course, where the government has all this secret stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
apparently some of it involves UFOs. Apparently, they had guests down there who looked just like us. They're from the
Wow.
planet. They're from the Pleiades stars. They claim,
Mm-hmm.
and and two of them were women.
Wow.
Okay, so they're out there at Site 51, out in the middle of the desert. There's nothing there. It's just a big military base surrounded with barbed wire and stuff. But you can see Las Vegas
Mm-hmm.
over the mountains. It looks like a dome of light every night because Las Vegas is so bright.
Right.
The two women aliens who look just like any human female said, "We want to go to Vegas." And the government people said, "You can't go to Vegas." But they
Really.
kept pestering them. And apparently the government got them some clothes like regular Earth women.
Mm-hmm.
They picked them out some nice clothes and they let them go to Vegas for, a day or so to play the slot machines and see the casinos, take in a few shows.
Right.
Can you believe that? But the
That's
thing is,
crazy.
it is crazy. Well, it's just crazy enough to be true because if you've got people out there who are like us physically and emotionally and psychologically, of course they feel bored and cooped up at this military base and they
Mm-hmm.
see this big city in the distance. So anyway, that's the craziest story I've heard out of this, but I
That is
sort of
crazy.
believe it.
That's
Ah,
crazy.
so
So
they
tell me
went
about.
there. They went because they're psychic. They won big at the poker tables. They won big.
That's funny. I want to start hanging out with them. I'll go to Vegas with them. Tell
Oh
me
yeah,
about the
that would
two.
have been fun to be. I'm sure the military people, were following them around, just saying, don't
Right.
win too much money and stuff like. Don't attract a lot of attention.
Absolutely. Tell me about the two craft sites because you mentioned that, one of the craft had, apparently had a big hole in it, from where it got shot down.
Yes,
Tell me a little bit
and
about those
and by
sites.
the way, and based, what's that?
Tell me a little bit about those sites. Go ahead.
Okay, the site uh, where that crash occurred is called the Plains of San Augustine, which is the Spanish
Mm-hmm.
pronunciation for St. Augustine.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the government has a big set of radio telescopes there.
Okay.
In fact, the government basically took over the land and decided to put a radio telescope there so that nobody can go snooping around. Basically, you can't go on that property because it's government property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, well, we don't want you disturbing our big radio antennas, right? So nobody can snoop around there. So, and I've been to that spot. Here's the creepy thing, or the spook. Let's not call it creepy. Let's just call it spooky.
Okay.
I didn't believe in UFOs when I visited there.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in Mars, and there's this town near in New Mexico, out near the plains of San Augustine. It's
Mm-hmm.
called Omega, the town of Omega, and it's just a little place with a store and a gas station. And I had an afternoon to kill one day, and I was in Albuquerque, so I drove down there by myself, and I drove out through the plains of San Augustine. And then I drove to Omega, New Mexico, so I could so I could tell everybody I'd been there. I've been to Omega, which is the end of the Greek alphabet, the end. And then I drove back to the plains of San Augustine. I stopped there, and I was looking at the radio telescopes, and I just had this feeling like this is where somehow my destiny was. It was very odd. I just had this feeling of just, like, this is the spot, John, where your destiny is going to make, you can understand why you live. And so I went back feeling kind of spooky about that spot. And then I found out that's where one of the places crashed. And
Wow.
it's about 20 miles from Socorro, New Mexico, which is a big city on the main highway
Mm-hmm.
between Las Cruces and El Paso, goes up to Albuquerque, goes straight through Socorro. And you go out 20 miles to the west and you run into the plains of San Augustine. And that's where this crash happened. And it had a big hole in it. This thing had a rough night. Now, that happened apparently on the morning of 4th of July, Independence Day. The other place they didn't even find out about till 4 days later. So they found a bunch of bodies, and the bodies had been chewed up by vultures and coyotes, by the way. This is New Mexico, after all. And now, here's what people have told me. They said, well, obviously, the two alien spaceships flew into the radar beams from Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, sure, that happens to airliners all the time. They fly into the airports we have with radars, and they get in the radar beams and they crash. It throws all the airline schedules off.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen. They have special guards on the radios and the electronics on airliners. They get
Mm-hmm.
a little interference it's basically the radars operate about the same frequency as your microwave oven. But you
Okay.
turn on a microwave oven, it doesn't zap out everything in the house.
Right.
And the Foo Fighters, which were the earlier, what they called UFOs before that, they'd been
Mm-hmm.
flying around all during World War II. There were radar beams every place during World War II. None of them crashed then. There were no reports of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, humans know how to shield their airplanes' electronics from the bad effects of radar. And you're telling me somebody from outer space who can fly fast, warp drive, hasn't figured that out, especially after they've been here for, since 1942, 5 years. So it wasn't radar, especially in those days. The radars weren't very powerful. Then people said, oh, it was a lightning storm. There was a bad lightning storm. Lightning strikes airliners and airplanes all the time. It just bounces off them because the lightning rides on the metal skin. It doesn't go inside them.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the right electronics on your airplane, and your planes have to be certified by the Federal Aviation System to be proof to lightning. If you're
Right.
flying in an airliner and it gets hit by lightning, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to spill your coffee, maybe. The pilot will go on to say, "Oh, we've gone through a little turbulence. Don't worry about anything." I have a picture in my book. So I wrote this all up in a book called Cosmic Awakening: What Really Happened at Roswell and the Genesis of the UFO Cover-Up. And I have a picture in there of a big lightning bolt hitting an airliner and going. It ran along the airliner and then jumped off the other side. That happens all the time. It's completely harmless. So they weren't. These ships were made out of metal, which reflects radar beams,
Right.
and because the wreckage was metal, and the wrecked saucer at St. Augustine was metal, and metal ships don't get hurt by lightning, and they don't get hurt by radar either. What
Right.
does hurt them? Well, let me tell you something. During World War II, they had these airplanes called the Black Widows, and they would actually paint the big double red triangle on the side of the planes, because they really got into they called them Black Widows because the Black Widow is a poisonous spider.
Right.
I grew up with
Right.
Black Widow. We just and they look black and glossy like that. So
Right.
anyway, they they had they have 4 20-millimeter cannons, these big giant machine guns on the bottom of the airplane, and then they got 4 50 caliber machine guns on the top in a turret that they can steer around. These things were very heavily armed. And when they shoot at you, it does make holes in your airplane or whatever it is. And it
Right.
does make some airplanes blow up into smithereens in the middle of the night. And that's apparently what happened. That's what does cause airplanes to disintegrate into piles of wreckage, and also shoots the others down with big holes in them. It's gunfire. And I know, look, I just want peace. I want peace between us and everybody. It says in the Bible, love your neighbor as
Right.
yourself. And that means our neighbors in the stars. I just want to love them. I want to get along with them. But we'd just gone through a war, a terrible war. And the government, like Pearl Harbor, when it happened, they had lots of warning and they ignored it. They ignored the warnings. And the government was determined that wasn't going to happen again. So the government was paranoid. And they were afraid of an invasion from outer space. And what would be our most powerful weapon to just, oppose an invasion from outer space? It'd be our nuclear weapons. And here's the aliens looking at our nuclear weapons, counting how many we got, seeing where they're stored. The government reacted like governments do. Oh, as it turns out, the Russians were even worse. Charlotte, the Russians, the United States government, when it saw these UFOs flying over, they said, well, that's kind of interesting. That was their first thought until they started flying over our base at Roswell, where we had our nuclear weapons. And that was secret at the time. That, by the way, nobody knew that at the time.
Right.
So the U.S. government was kind of relaxed. They thought it was just like the Foo Fighters during World War II, a harmless nuisance. But the Russians, being Russians, they figured anything that they couldn't identify flying over Russia was either British or American spy planes after World War II. So they would scramble their MiGs and chase them and shoot whatever guided missiles they had at them. And they finally, apparently, they had their own Roswell incident. They finally brought one down, and the trucks full of Russian troops arrived with their funny hats, and they pried open the hatch on it with a crowbar, looked inside, and then they said, "Ne Amerikanski." These people aren't Americans. So that's when the Russians found out that there were people from outer space snooping around. And they were snooping around at their nuclear site too. That's the thing. So the Russians, being Russians, took a very negative view of this. And Ivan was even more paranoid than Uncle Sammy. And so that sort of started the whole UFO cover up. It wasn't just that there were people from outer space, it's that some of them were not very nice.
Right.
And I'm sorry, the nice ones, there are nice ones out there. I heard many reports of nice ones. They say there are 50 different species that have come here to visit. Most of them are just curious about us. I mean, they just want to they want to see Vegas at night.
Right.
And some of them maybe land and send their people to Vegas to see how well they can do at the crap tables. And so the government found out that most of the universe is very friendly to us, or at least just curious about us. Nothing negative about it. But the Klingons are out there too, and all it takes is one fly in the ointment,
Yep.
and that's all it takes. You know, we can ignore the friendly ones and not talk about them because they're being friendly and they're following like a prime directive during Star Trek. They're not out to cause any fuss. They just want to be helpful and they want to get to know us better. And go to Vegas. But then there's a fly in the ointment. There's one or two groups out there who are not friendly, not very nice, and we're trying to get along with them. And it's a little bit like two motorcycle gangs. We're here on our own turf. You can say we're the Mongols and they're the Hells Angels or whatever you want to say, as by analogy. But what this means, my friends, is we're slowly but surely moving toward understanding we're not alone in the universe. The government is slowly but surely breaking it to us.
Right.
And it's probably going to come out fairly soon that the government, has anti-gravity, that you can do it in your garage. I mean, you can't make stuff that flies, but you can actually make a tiny amount of it in your garage. And so there's so let's just it's a hard thing right now to be optimistic about the future. Everything looks like it's going to hell, but it's not going to end up there. It's going to be fine. I got 3 kids, and I believe my grandchildren. I got 2 grandchildren. I believe their world will be better. The world that I live, Charlotte, the world that we live in, isn't it better than the world we grew up in?
Yes.
Yes, it is. And I believe the world that my grandchildren will grow up in is going to be even better than what we have now. We even have the internet. We have all these computers and we have these podcasts at California Haunts.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you. So I work on the planet Mars, and which is extra. By the way, the government it's juggling a whole bunch of cover-ups now. There's a Mars cover-up. Anytime they find a strange rock on Mars that looks like it has fossils in it, or that Mars rover driving along looks like it found a carved doorway in the hillside.
Right.
Do you think they stopped to investigate it, Charlotte? they told the boss leaning, they actually drive those things where the people on Earth have big steering wheels. They actually
Mhm.
drive those rovers just like cars.
Mhm.
And they just told them, keep on driving.
Crazy.
Pretend you're in LA and you see somebody with a gorilla suit on the
Yeah.
road trying to wave you down for a ride. Just keep driving. Just don't keep
Right.
paying attention to them. And so the government has a Mars cover up going on.
Mhm.
It's got a UFO cover up going on. And also, there are meteorites apparently that have signs of life in them, just bacteria. The government
Mhm.
doesn't even want anybody talking about those either. Every time somebody says, "Oh, I found bacteria in these meteorites," they say, "Oh, no, that was just contamination because it landed on Earth, right?
Right.
Earth
Absolutely.
has a lot of bacteria. So some of the bacteria somehow managed to wiggle itself into the center of that rock before you could pick it up. Some of that rock was picked up while it was still hot, and
Mhm.
they find little microfossils in there that look like bacteria. And once you find life on Mars, Charlotte, then you know there's life in the stars.
Yep.
That's
Absolutely.
all it takes. Just one fossil on,
Right.
if they break open a rock on Mars and find one fossil animal in there, suddenly it's all over. Then we
Mhm.
know we're not alone. But the thing is, and I think the people, you and I, we know we're not alone. We just can't handle it consciously. So it's kind of a lot of people just put it in the back of their minds. Women have an expression. Well, I backburnered that one.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
put that on the back burner. I got the, I wrote this science fiction novel, and I got these two women in there, and I don't know. I had fun writing it because I've been married twice, and I've had a lot of women friends,
Mhm.
and the way women are much more verbally creative than us men, and like the two women, well, there's the novel about the collapse of the UFO cover-up. Okay, so that happens, but there's a prequel to that where the two women find out. Well, there's this asteroid called Asteroid 2012 Sepulveda.
Mhm.
Sepulveda is, if everybody's been into LA, Sepulveda Boulevard is the longest street in at Los Angeles. And I was just fascinated by the name, so I decided to name the asteroid after that. And
Mhm.
and these two women use it as a gimmick for their morning show.
Mhm.
They have this morning show called Jade and Blondie in the Morning. They do
Okay.
this show where they have guest stars and stuff, and and then their boss keeps leaning on it to increase their viewer share. So
Mhm.
he says, so they say, well, we got to have a gimmick, and then they find out that this asteroid has been discovered. It's been discovered by this Chicana astronomer named Alicia Sepulveda, and
Right.
so she names it after her family. She figures out its orbit very precisely. She's very careful,
Mhm.
and she she puts it up on the big on the internet on the big bulletin board of the
Mhm.
astronomers. She found this thing, and it gets confirmed that yes, the asteroid is out there, and the government puts the orbit of the asteroid that she found into their computers. Bingo! It's going to hit the Earth in a year.
Wow.
Well, she did a really good job. She did it really precisely, and she got the orbit down to not 9 places,
Mhm.
and using the latest telescopes to do it. And so they go looking for her and tell her, don't tell anybody, what we found about your asteroid. And she says, well, can I change the name? I named it after my family. They say, no, that'll attract more attention. We don't want nobody paying attention to this asteroid.
Right.
And as it turns out, the two women hear about this asteroid and they think, that's our gimmick. We're going to move our show to Hollywood and call it Jade and Blondie Watch the Stars. And they're going to have a countdown for the asteroid flying over because it's going to fly over LA, they think. In fact,
Right.
their science editor says to them, the blonde is the one who's kind of in charge at that point. She says, well, where's this asteroid going to be most visible? And he says, it's going to fly right over Los Angeles in the middle of the night. And you ought to be able to see it,
Right.
just your naked eyes or binoculars. And the blonde and the Asian just look at each other. They start to smile. And the blonde says, no, it's not going to fly over Los Angeles. It's going to fly over Hollywood. So they decide to move their show to Hollywood and call it Jade and Blondie Watch the Stars.
There you
And
go.
they use it as a gimmick to promote their show. And and the government notices that they're talking about this asteroid, so they start following them around, Men in Black kind of.
Yeah.
And the Asian is driving her sports car, and the blonde is doing her nails. And the Asian says, that same car keeps following us. I've spotted it yesterday. It's the third day I've spotted this car behind us. And it's got men, two men in it following us.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time they're in Arizona, and the blonde's doing her nails, filing her nails and putting some nail polish on them. She says, they've been following us ever since we left DC.
Mm-hmm.
And the Asian, whose name is Cassandra, says, well, what is it? Why are they following us? And the blonde just says, I backburnered that question. I backburnered it. And we'll figure that out when we get to LA. Meantime, let's just keep driving and maybe they'll go away. And so anyway, I had fun with it. And they're sitting in LA. They set up their show with a little studio and studio audience and everything in LA. And they're successful. They're having a great time. And they're talking about the countdown to the asteroid. And they invite this woman on board on the show who's wearing this green sparkly leotard with a football helmet with antenna on it. And she claims to be from the asteroid. And they're having fun with it. And then they find out that the government is watched. They finding out the government's watching them. And they realize, it's not going to just fly over LA.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to fly really close to LA. And they tell the science editor that the blonde says to the science editor who started this whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
she says, well, his name is Murray. She says, Murray, so it's going to hit the Earth, I guess, right? That's why the government is so interested. It's not made out of gold. Nobody can live on it. The only reason the government would be interested in it is going to hit the Earth. And she says to him, where's it going to hit? And he's looking at a big map of LA. And he doesn't say anything. And she realizes, oh my God. She says, Murray, you idiot, you've moved our show right to ground zero.
That's funny.
So I have fun with it. I have fun with it. And so anyway, and it was fun writing science fiction. It was a great thing to write science fiction about.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a UFO cover up. Yeah, I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I know that some people, if the government went on the radio and told them everything I've told, if the government here's John Brandenburg. Brandenburg, who the hell is he? He don't know jack. Okay, if the president goes on and says the same thing I'm telling you,
Mhm.
everybody would freak out.
Right.
And that wouldn't be good. The stock market would crash. People would be lining up at the banks to get all their cash out. People would be buying gold. All sorts of crazy stuff would happen. So the government is going slow with it. I understand. See,
Mhm.
working in Washington D.C., I kind of understood finally the government's viewpoint.
Mhm.
The government, their view is, well, what they don't know won't hurt them right now. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, maybe they're out driving on a road sometime and a UFO buzzes them off the road. They'll be okay. It's just uh, during World War II, as a matter of fact, the Imperial Japanese government made these bombs on balloons and they launched them from Japan and they sailed
Mhm.
right over the Pacific Ocean and they would go over the United States and they'd drop on the ground and go off.
Right. Right.
I mean, they weren't very big bombs. They were only about as big as a hand grenade. And they didn't really cause any trouble. I mean, they set off a few fires, but they put them out. And the government decided they didn't want the Japanese to know that some of the balloons were even getting here. So they decided not to not to report it, and they didn't tell anybody. Well, of course, somebody found one of these bombs on the ground on a picnic, and it blew up while their kids were handling it, and a bunch of people got killed. A whole family of 6 people got killed. Then the government talked about it, but until then, it was just considered a nuisance, and the government felt that uh, we don't have to tell anybody about this.
Mhm.
Why make the Japanese feel good? The we're at war with the Japanese. We don't want them to
Mhm.
think that they can hit us with these bombs.
Right.
So in fact, the Imperial Japanese government, and I emphasize the Imperial Japanese government, said, well, we're doing all this work, launching hundreds of balloons, and only, none of them seem to be making it to the United States. We'll just quit
Mhm.
doing it. So that's what they did. They basically just quit doing it because they had enough troubles already.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and that's where, in fact, I think that's where the government got the idea that anything you spot strange in the sky, it's a balloon.
Mhm.
So it's so I don't like government not telling us the truth,
Right.
but at the same time, especially here in Southern Oregon, talking to some of my neighbors, I know they won't take it very well if the government tells them the truth. And
Mhm.
so I understand. I don't approve, but I do understand. There's this line in Star Trek where some government official on some planet is telling Spock, explaining what they're doing, and Spock says, "I understand." He nods, and the guy says, "Oh, so you approve? You
Mhm.
I do not approve, but I do understand why you're doing what you're doing." And so, uh, but I think slowly but surely, it's the government is going to break it to us.
Mhm.
It's like a man who went on a trip and he left his cat with his neighbor.
Right.
He comes back after his trip, and his friend meets him at the airport. Looks kind of nervous. He says, "Well, hi there, Bill. I'm surprised you're here at the airport." He says, "Yeah, I wanted to meet you. He said, "You know that tree out in your front yard?" And the guy who's been on the trip says, "Yeah, Bill." Let's call the guy who left on the trip Bob, and the guy who stayed kept the cat Bill. So
Mhm.
so he says, "Well, Bob, you know that tree out in front of your yard? While you were gone, lightning struck it and caught it on fire." Oh, well, that's a shame. And then tree fell over and hit your house. Our house burned down.
Mhm.
And the guy says, "Oh my God, my house burned down while I was gone." And Bill says, "Yeah, I'm afraid so." And but you got fire insurance, right? And the guy says, "Yeah, yeah." Bob says, "Yeah, I got fire insurance. It'll be okay." Uh, and uh, and then he says, "You know, your cat, it was in the tree when it got hit by lightning, and it got scared and jumped out of the tree onto your house. So your cat got burned up with your house."
Wow.
And the guy said, "Oh my God." So he says, "Your cat is dead." And then Bob says, "Oh my God," you
That's
know.
funny.
And so Bill says to him, so your house burned down. I'm sorry, Bill. And we're sorry as hell about your cat." So that's the way the government's going to break it to
Right,
us.
right.
You
John, it
know,
has been a fun hour. I thank you for coming on.
it'll be a long story. And yeah, so your cat is dead.
I thank you for coming on. It's been really
It's
fun.
kind of like cat.
What's next for you?
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you liked it. That's why.
Okay.
Okay,
How can
Charlotte.
people?
Well, yeah. So my book's on Amazon.com.
Okay.
Cosmic Awakening: What
Mhm.
Really Happened in Roswell.
Okay.
So
How can
you
people
have a
find you?
wonderful evening, Charlotte. Thanks for
You
for
too.
letting
Thank
me
you
on your
very
show.
much. I appreciate you coming on. Have a great one.
I hope I haven't spooked out or frightened people with what I've seen on this show.
I'll see you. You have a good one. Okay, that was great. I learned so much. I have to apologize. I brought my old dog in here with me because he was really hot, and so I'm sitting here with the mic. He's right down at my feet, so he keeps bumping me and knocking things over down there. So I'm having to look down every once in a while, and I forget the mic's there, so I'm bumping my head on the mic. So I'm looking up and down with him, and yeah, he's quieted down now. But during the show, he was just back and forth down there, kicking me. So you'll see me go like this. I'm not dozing. I'm trying to get down and look at him to get a better view, like right down in front of me here. Anyway, that was a great show. I enjoyed talking with John. A lot to say. I learned a lot, as always. Tomorrow night is going to be a little different for us. Tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about bees. Brett Knudsen and Jake Cunningham are going to be with us, and we're going to be talking about this new sound wave thing they found for bees. And during their studies with this, they found that this thing helps the bees mature, that it keeps the bees from dying from toxins, and they produce more honey. So we're going to be talking about that. That'll be tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. In the meantime, sit tight again. Come on over to the Patreon and visit us. Also, for the people that are on the Patreon on that first level, I will be doing 2 pre-recorded videos in the next couple weeks, so you guys are going to get to see those as the as the 2 week preview before it goes to the main show. I've got the backdrop set up already for the new show, that we're going to be doing Saturdays for the Patreon people. So that's all coming together. And so, like Michelle asked the other night whether there was going to be a link. Yes, there will be a link because I'll be doing that I'll be doing that show directly from YouTube. And so I'm going to set it up as a private room. So the people that are over on the Patreon will get a link for that. Okay, look, he's down there again. Look. He's trying to see. I don't know what he's doing. He's half blind, so he he moves around a lot. But anyway, yeah. So if you saw me doing this, that's what I was doing. I was trying to look slowly and get in a good position to see him. All right. Well, that's going to do it for me tonight. And I enjoyed this talk about Roswell. Always like talking about Roswell. Again, I'll see you tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're equal opportunity here. Just trying to get the word out about our little show. All right. Have a great evening, everybody. See you at 6:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. Bye.